The November wind cut through Jake Morrison's worn army jacket like it wasn't even there. He sat on the tailgate of his rusted Ford Ranger in the corner of a Walmart parking lot outside Billings, Montana, watching his breath fog in the cold air. Beside him, a German Shepherd mix named Gunnar pressed close, sharing what little warmth they had between them. Jake was 34, but looked older. 3 tours in Afghanistan had carved lines into his face that didn't belong to a man his age. His hands shook sometimes, not from the cold, but from memories that refused to stay buried. Most nights, he didn't sleep more than 2 hours. The nightmares saw to that. Gunnar had been with him for 4 years now, ever since Jake found him limping along a highway outside Kandahar during his last deployment. The dog had taken shrapnel in his hind leg, saving a patrol from an ambush Jake's patrol. They'd patched each other up, survived together, and when Jake came home to nothing, Gunnar was the only thing that made sense. The parking lot was Jake's 3rd home this month. Before that, it was a shelter in Great Falls until they said his time was up. Before that, a friend's couch until the friend's girlfriend said the dog had to go. Jake chose Gunnar. He always chose Gunnar. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Jake almost didn't answer, but something made him swipe. Mr. Morrison? A woman's voice, professional but not unkind. Yeah. This is Patricia Hendricks from Wendell & Associates, estate attorneys in Helena. I'm calling regarding the estate of Conrad Morrison. Jake frowned. Don't know any Conrad Morrison. He was your grandfather. Your father's father. The words hit Jake like a punch. My dad never mentioned him. Not once. I understand there was estrangement in the family. Patricia continued carefully. But Mr. Morrison passed away 6 months ago, and you're listed as his sole heir. Jake's heart hammered. Heir to what? A property. Approximately 40 acres in the Tobacco Root Mountains near the town of Silver Point. It includes a sealed bunker structure built in 1965. Mr. Morrison left very specific instructions that it should only be opened by a blood relative. Jake looked at Gunnar, who was staring at him with those intelligent amber eyes. What's the catch? No catch. But there is one condition. The property must be claimed in person within 30 days, or it reverts to the state. The deadline is in 9 days. Jake's mind raced. How much does this cost me? Nothing. It's yours. I'm emailing you the coordinates and access codes now. There's also a sealed letter from your grandfather. I can read it to you, or read it. Patricia cleared her throat. It says, to whoever carries my blood. If you're reading this, you're probably wondering why I left you something instead of nothing. Truth is, I left you everything. But what I buried isn't gold or money. It's the truth about what happened in Silver Point in 1965. Men in power tried to bury it, and they buried me with it. If you've got my stubbornness in you, you'll dig it up. And if you've got a dog with you, all the better. They see things we miss. Come find what I couldn't finish. Conrad Morrison. Jake sat in silence for a long moment. Gunnar nudged his hand. Mr. Morrison? Are you still there? I'm here. Jake exhaled slowly. I'll be there in 2 days. When he hung up, he looked at Gunnar. What do you think, boy? One last mission? Gunnar's tail thumped once against the tailgate, and for the first time in months, something like hope flickered in Jake's chest. The drive to Silver Point took them through winding mountain roads that climbed higher with every mile. Jake's truck coughed and sputtered, burning oil, barely holding together. He'd put in his last $40 of gas to make the trip. If this inheritance was real, it was his only shot. If it wasn't, he'd be stranded in the mountains with winter coming. Gunnar sat in the passenger seat, head out the window, nose testing the cold mountain air. Every few minutes he'd glance back at Jake, checking on him the way he always did. As they crossed into the Tobacco Root Range, the forest thickened. Towering pines pressed close to the road, their branches heavy with early snow. The November sky hung low and gray, threatening more. Jake hadn't slept the night before. The parking lot had been too cold, and his mind had been too full of questions. Who was Conrad Morrison? Why had Jake's father never mentioned him? What truth was buried up here? The GPS led them off the highway onto a gravel road, then onto a dirt path barely wide enough for the truck. Branches scraped the sides as they climbed. Finally, the trees opened into a small clearing. Jake stopped the truck and stared. A chain-link fence surrounded a concrete structure built into the hillside. It looked like something out of the Cold War, a bunker with a heavy steel door set into reinforced walls. Rust streaked the metal. Weeds had grown up around the base, but the structure itself looked solid, untouched by time. A weathered sign hung on the fence. Private property. Conrad Morrison. No trespassing. Jake killed the engine. The silence was absolute. Gunnar hopped out first, immediately alert. His ears swiveled, nose working the air. Then he froze, staring at the bunker entrance with an intensity Jake recognized from Afghanistan. The same focus Gunnar had before detecting IEDs or hidden threats. "What is it, boy?" Gunnar didn't bark. He just walked slowly toward the fence, hackles rising slightly, tail stiff. Jake followed, pulling the access code from his phone. The fence gate had a combination lock. He entered the numbers Patricia had sent. The lock popped open. Jake pushed through the gate, Gunnar close at his heel. The concrete structure loomed larger up close, cold and imposing. The steel door had a keypad and a heavy locking wheel, like something from a submarine. Jake entered the second code. A mechanical click echoed from inside. Then silence. He gripped the wheel and turned. Rust fought him, but the mechanism still worked. With a groan of metal, the door swung inward. Cold air rushed out, carrying the smell of earth, concrete, and something else. Old paper. Stale air that hadn't moved in decades. Jake pulled out his flashlight and stepped inside. The beam cut through darkness, revealing a narrow corridor leading deeper into the hillside. The walls were bare concrete, the floor dusty but intact. Electrical conduits ran along the ceiling, connected to nothing. Gunnar pressed against Jake's leg, whining softly. "I know," Jake whispered. "Something's not right here." They moved forward. The corridor opened into a larger room, maybe 20 feet square. Metal shelving lined the walls, mostly empty. A desk sat in one corner, covered in dust. And in the center of the room was a steel trunk with a combination lock. But what stopped Jake cold was the wall on the far side. Someone had spray painted over old writing. Fresh paint, recent, maybe weeks old. But the original writing bled through faintly beneath it. The truth is buried deeper. Jake's pulse quickened. Someone's been here. Gunnar moved to the trunk, sniffing around it, then suddenly backed away and barked. Once. Sharp. Urgent. Jake knelt beside the trunk. The combination lock was old, but the numbers Patricia had sent worked. The lock clicked open. Inside were files. Dozens of them. Yellowed paper, photographs, geological surveys, and a leather journal with Conrad Morrison's name on the cover. Jake pulled out the journal and opened it. The first entry was dated March 15, 1965. "They've started the excavation. I told Sheriff Carver it was too deep, too close to the aquifer. But Carver's on Hemisphere Mining's payroll, same as half the county council. Nobody's listening. I'm documenting everything. If something goes wrong, someone needs to know the truth." Jake flipped through more pages. Photographs fell out. Men in hard hats near a massive pit. Industrial equipment. Barrels being lowered into the ground. Then one photograph made Jake's blood run cold. It showed the same bunker he was standing in now, but in 1965. And beside it stood Conrad Morrison with a German shepherd that looked almost identical to Gunnar. Jake stared at the photo, then at Gunnar. The resemblance was uncanny. Same build, same markings, same intelligent eyes. "What is this?" Jake whispered. Gunnar barked again, louder this time, and bolted toward the back wall. He scratched at the concrete, whining frantically. Jake rushed over with the flashlight. "What do you smell?" Then he saw it. A seam in the concrete. Hidden unless you knew where to look. A false wall. Jake ran his fingers along the edge. There was a lever, disguised as a conduit bracket. He pulled it. The wall section shifted with a grinding sound, revealing a narrow passage leading deeper into the mountain. Jake's breath caught. "Grandpa, what did you find?" Gunnar didn't wait. He disappeared into the passage. "Gunnar, wait." Jake followed, flashlight beam bouncing as he hurried after the dog. The passage descended steeply, carved directly into rock. Water dripped somewhere ahead. The air grew colder, damper. After 50 feet, the passage opened into a natural cavern. And in the center of that cavern, lit by Jake's flashlight, were barrels. Dozens of them. Rusted, leaking, marked with faded hazard symbols. Chemical waste. Jake's stomach turned. "Oh God." Gunnar circled the barrels, growling. Then he stopped at one that had ruptured, its contents long since seeped into the ground. He looked back at Jake and barked once. Jake knelt, examining the barrel. The label was barely legible. Hemisphere Mining CO. Industrial solvent. Hazardous. His grandfather's journal had mentioned Hemisphere Mining. And an aquifer. If this waste had been seeping into the groundwater for 60 years. A sound echoed from the passage behind him. Footsteps. Fast. Jake spun, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. A man stood at the entrance to the cavern. Tall, mid-50s, expensive jacket, clean boots. Behind him stood two others. Younger. Bigger. Not friendly. The first man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Well, I was hoping we'd get here before you did. Jake's military instincts kicked in. He positioned himself between Gunnar and the strangers. Who are you? Marcus Hemisphere, CEO of Hemisphere Mining. And you must be Conrad's grandson. Marcus stepped closer. I've been monitoring the estate transfer. Couldn't let you dig around unsupervised. Jake's jaw tightened. Your company dumped toxic waste into the aquifer. Ancient history. Long before environmental regulations. We cleaned everything up in the 80s. Marcus gestured at the barrels. These are just forgotten remnants. Forgotten. Jake's voice rose. People in Silver Point drink from that aquifer. And they've been just fine for 60 years. Marcus's smile faded. Listen, son. I came here to make you an offer. $500,000 for this property and everything on it. You sign the deed over to me, and you walk away rich. No questions asked. Jake stared at him. You want to bury this again. I want to avoid unnecessary panic. There's no active contamination. But if you go public with this, he gestured at the barrels, it'll destroy property values, tank the local economy, and accomplish nothing except making lawyers rich. Gunnar growled low in his throat. Marcus glanced at the dog. Think about it. $500,000. That's life-changing money for a guy living in his truck. Jake's hands clenched. For a split second, he imagined it. An apartment. Stability. Food. Warmth. Security for him and Gunnar. Then he thought of Conrad Morrison, a man who'd spent his life trying to expose this truth. A man his own family had erased from history because he wouldn't stay quiet. Jake met Marcus's eyes. Get out. Marcus's expression hardened. You're making a mistake. I said get out. The two men behind Marcus shifted forward, but Marcus raised a hand. We'll give you time to reconsider. But understand this. If you try to expose what's down here, you'll be fighting people with resources you can't imagine. And accidents happen in these mountains. Especially to men living alone. Marcus turned and walked back up the passage, his men following. When their footsteps faded, Jake exhaled shakily. Gunnar pressed against his leg, grounding him. We need help, Jake whispered. We need someone we can trust. But in a town where Hemisphere Mining had owned the sheriff 60 years ago, who could he trust now? Jake sat in the bunker for an hour after Marcus Hemisphere left, reading his grandfather's journal by flashlight. Gunnar lay beside him, occasionally lifting his head at distant sounds, but staying calm. The journal told a story Jake wished wasn't true. April 3rd, 1965, took samples from Miller Creek. Industrial solvents confirmed. Hemisphere's dumping went deeper than I thought. Not just surface runoff. They're injecting waste directly into abandoned mine shafts. Sheriff Carver laughed when I showed him the results. Said I was making trouble where there isn't any. He's protecting them. June 18th, 1965. Doc Brennan saw 3 cases of unexplained illness this month. Kids with respiratory issues. But nobody wants to connect it to the mining operations. Too many jobs at stake, they say. Too much money flowing through Silver Point. September 9th, 1965. Someone followed me home tonight. Black sedan, no plates. Parked outside until sunrise. Message received. But I'm not stopping. Built the sealed bunker. If something happens to me, the evidence survives. The final entry was dated November 2nd, 1965. They're coming for me. I can feel it. Moving all documentation to the lower chamber tonight. If anyone from my bloodline finds this, know that I tried. The truth is buried deeper than the waste, but it's there. Don't let them bury it again. Conrad. Jake closed the journal, throat tight. His grandfather hadn't died of natural causes. He'd been silenced. And now Marcus Hemisphere was trying to silence Jake the same way. Gunnar suddenly lifted his head, ears pointed toward the entrance. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Jake tensed. What is it? Then he heard it. A vehicle. Close. Jake moved to the bunker entrance and peered out. A sheriff's SUV sat near the fence, engine running. A woman in uniform stood beside it, hand resting casually near her holster. She wasn't pointing a weapon, wasn't advancing, just waiting. Jake stepped out slowly, Gunnar at his heel. The woman was in her late 30s, dark hair pulled back, sharp eyes that missed nothing. Her badge read, Sheriff L. Brennan. She studied Jake for a moment. You must be Conrad's grandson. Jake Morrison. Lisa Brennan. I'm the sheriff now. She glanced at the bunker. Heard you had visitors earlier. Marcus Hemisphere and his boys. Jake's jaw tightened. Word travels fast. In Silver Point, everything travels fast. Population 847. Hard to keep secrets. She tilted her head. Though this place has kept one for 60 years. You know what's down there? Lisa's expression was carefully neutral. I know my grandfather was Doc Brennan, the one who treated those kids in 1965. And I know he spent the last 20 years of his life wondering if he could have done more. Jake felt something shift. Your grandfather knew Conrad. They were friends. Both of them tried to expose Hemisphere. Both of them were shut down by people with power and money. Lisa took a step closer, voice lowering. Look, I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here because I want the same thing you do. The truth. How do I know you're not working for Hemisphere? Lisa smiled grimly. Because Hemisphere Mining donated $50,000 to my opponent in the last election. They didn't want me in this job. I won anyway. Jake studied her. Military training had taught him to read people. Lisa Brennan's body language was open, honest. She wasn't hiding weapons. Wasn't flanked by backup. Gunnar made the decision for him. The dog walked up to Lisa and sniffed her hand. Then sat calmly beside her. Not growling. Not tense. Gunnar doesn't trust easy, Jake said. Smart dog. Lisa crouched and scratched behind Gunnar's ears. The dog leaned into it. I grew up hearing stories about Conrad Morrison's dog. Shepherd mix. Saved 2 kids from a mine collapse in '64. Legend around here. Jake pulled out the photograph from 1965. This the dog. Lisa's eyes widened. Yeah, that's Rex. He and your grandfather were inseparable. She looked at Gunnar. Bloodline, maybe? Has to be. The resemblance is too close. Lisa stood. Listen, if you've got evidence down there, I can help. But you need to understand what you're up against. Hemisphere Mining is the largest employer in 3 counties. They've got lawyers, politicians, and money most people can't imagine. If you go public, they'll destroy you. They already threatened me. Threatened or warned? Both. Lisa's expression hardened. Then we move carefully. Smart. Legal. She paused. But first, I need to see what's in that cavern. Jake hesitated. What if it puts you at risk? I've been at risk since I pinned on this badge in a county owned by Hemisphere. Lisa met his eyes. I'd rather fight for something that matters. Jake made the call. Follow me. Inside the bunker, Lisa moved with purpose. She photographed everything. The journal entries. The files. The chemical barrels in the cavern below. She took soil samples. Water samples. Documented every label still legible on the waste containers. Gunnar stayed close to Jake, occasionally sniffing along the walls, following scents only he understood. After 2 hours, Lisa emerged from the lower chamber, face grim. This is worse than I thought. If this waste has been seeping into the aquifer for 60 years. She didn't finish the sentence. People are sick, Jake said quietly. People are dying. Lisa pulled out a folder from her vehicle. Over the last 20 years, Silver Point has had cancer rates 40% higher than the state average. Respiratory illnesses. Neurological conditions. The health department flagged it twice, but the state said there wasn't enough evidence to prove causation. Because Hemisphere buried the evidence. And anyone who tried to dig it up. Lisa looked at Jake. Your grandfather wasn't the only one. In 1982, a geology professor from the university came up here to study groundwater. Found contamination. Published a preliminary report. A week later, his lab was vandalized. His research destroyed. He left Montana and never came back. Jake felt rage building in his chest. How do they keep getting away with it? Money. Power. Fear. Lisa closed the folder. But here's the thing. Times have changed. Environmental Protection Agency has teeth now. Media coverage is harder to control. And you, she pointed at Jake, you're a veteran. Homeless. Sympathetic. If you go public with this, people will listen. And Hemisphere will bury me. Not if we're smart. Not if we move fast. Jake paced the bunker, mind racing. What's the play? Lisa laid it out. Tomorrow morning, I file a formal request with the EPA for emergency testing of the Silver Point aquifer. I cite your grandfather's documentation and the barrels in this cavern as probable cause. That puts it on the federal record. Hemisphere can't make it disappear. They'll know it came from me. Let them. Once it's federal, they can't touch you without drawing attention. Lisa's eyes sharpened. But you have to be ready. They'll come after you legally. Character assassination. They'll dig into your past, your service record, your homelessness. They'll paint you as unstable, unreliable. Jake's jaw clenched. I've been called worse. I know. But this time, you'll have backup. Lisa extended her hand. You with me? Jake looked at Gunnar. The dog stared back, steady, trusting. He shook Lisa's hand. I'm with you. That night, Jake slept in the bunker. Not because it was comfortable, but because it was secure. He locked the steel door from the inside and wedged a metal pipe against it for extra measure. Gunnar curled up beside him on a military surplus sleeping bag Jake had found in the trunk. For the first time in months, Jake didn't have nightmares. Instead, he dreamed of Conrad Morrison and a German shepherd named Rex, standing together in the Montana mountains, refusing to back down. He woke to Gunnar's growl. Low. Sustained. Dangerous. Jake sat up instantly, hand instinctively reaching for the knife he kept in his boot. What is it? Gunnar was at the door, hackles raised, staring at the steel as if he could see through it. Then Jake heard it. Footsteps outside. Not one person. Multiple. He moved to the small ventilation grate near the ceiling and peered out. 3 trucks. Parked near the fence. Men moving in the pre-dawn darkness, carrying equipment. Cameras. Survey tools. And one man directing them all. Marcus Hemisphere. Jake's blood ran cold. They weren't here to threaten. They were here to remove the evidence. He grabbed his phone. No signal. Too deep in the mountains. Gunnar barked once, sharp and urgent. I know, boy. I know. Jake made a decision. He couldn't let them take the barrels. Couldn't let them scrub the site clean. If this evidence disappeared, the truth died with it. He opened the steel door just enough to slip out, Gunnar right behind him. The men hadn't noticed yet. They were focused on the lower chamber entrance, trying to navigate the narrow passage with equipment. Jake circled around through the trees, staying low, moving the way he'd learned in Afghanistan. Quiet. Invisible. Gunnar moved like a shadow beside him, instincts honed from years in combat zones. They reached the fence line. Jake could see Marcus now, standing near the bunker entrance, phone to his ear. I don't care what it costs. We sanitized this site today. No evidence, no problem. Morrison's grandson has nothing without. Marcus stopped mid-sentence. He was staring at something. Jake followed his gaze. Lisa Brennan's sheriff SUV, pulling up the dirt road. Lights flashing. Behind her, 2 Montana State Patrol vehicles. Marcus's expression went from confident to panicked in seconds. Lisa stepped out, megaphone in hand. Marcus Hemisphere, this is an active investigation site. You and your men need to leave immediately. Marcus didn't move. This is private property. Not anymore. As of 6 a.m. this morning, the EPA classified this site as a federal environmental investigation zone. Nobody enters without authorization. Lisa gestured to the State Patrol officers. These men will escort you off the property. One of Marcus's crew stepped forward. You can't do this. I just did. Lisa's voice was steel. And if you interfere with a federal investigation, you'll be charged with obstruction. Marcus locked eyes with Jake across the clearing. For a moment, neither man moved. Then Marcus smiled. Cold. Calculated. This isn't over. You're right. Jake called out, stepping from the trees. It's not. Because now the whole world's going to know what you buried. Marcus's smile faded. He turned and walked to his truck, his men following reluctantly. As the vehicles drove away, Lisa approached Jake. You okay? How did you know they'd be here? I didn't. But I know how men like Hemisphere think. They move fast to protect their interests. She glanced at the bunker. EPA team arrives in 4 hours. Until then, this site is under state protection. Jake felt the tension drain from his shoulders. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. The real fight starts now. Gunnar barked once, tail wagging, as if agreeing. And for the first time since Jake arrived in Silver Point, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not just hope. Purpose. The EPA team descended on the bunker like a small army. 12 specialists in hazmat suits, carrying testing equipment, sample containers, and documentation cameras. They worked methodically, treating the site like the crime scene it was. Jake watched from outside the fence, Gunnar at his side. Lisa stayed with him, coordinating with the federal agents while keeping Marcus Hemisphere's lawyers at bay. They'd shown up an hour after the EPA, demanding access, demanding explanations, demanding everything be handled through proper channels. Proper channels, Lisa had replied coldly, are exactly what we're using. Feel free to wait. By late afternoon, the lead EPA scientist emerged from the bunker. Her name was Dr. Sarah Chun, mid-40s, no-nonsense expression. She pulled off her respirator and approached Lisa and Jake. Preliminary findings confirm contamination, Dr. Chun said. Industrial solvents, heavy metals, and chemical compounds consistent with 1960s mining operations. The barrels are severely degraded. Based on groundwater flow patterns, contamination likely spread into the aquifer decades ago. Lisa's jaw tightened. How bad? We won't know the full scope until we test wells throughout Silver Point. But if this waste has been seeping for 60 years? Dr. Chin paused. People have been drinking contaminated water for generations. Jake felt the weight of those words settle on him. My grandfather tried to stop this. Dr. Chin glanced at the journal he'd given her. Conrad Morrison documented everything. His data is solid. If anyone had listened to him in 1965, this could have been prevented. She looked at Jake. You did the right thing bringing this forward. Will Hemisphere face consequences? That's above my pay grade. But this evidence is now in federal hands. Whatever happens next is out of their control. Lisa turned to Jake. We need to inform the town. Before rumors spread, people deserve to know the truth. Jake nodded. How? Town meeting. Tomorrow night. I'll notify the county. You'll need to speak. Jake's chest tightened. Public speaking had never been easy, even before PTSD made crowds feel like threats. What do I say? The truth. Lisa placed a hand on his shoulder. Just tell them what you found. That night, Jake tried to prepare. He sat in the bunker with Gunnar, reviewing his grandfather's journal, organizing the story in his mind. But every time he practiced speaking the words aloud, his throat closed up. Gunnar rested his head on Jake's knee, sensing the anxiety. I'm not good at this, boy, Jake whispered. I've barely spoken to people in months. Now I'm supposed to stand in front of a whole town. Gunnar's tail thumped softly. Jake stroked the dog's fur, grounding himself. You'd do it though, wouldn't you? If it meant protecting people, you'd walk into fire. Gunnar looked up at him with those steady amber eyes. Jake took a breath. Okay. For Conrad. For the people Hemisphere poisoned. For you. He managed a faint smile. We do this together. The Silver Point Community Center was packed. Every chair filled, people standing along the walls, crowding near the doors. Jake hadn't expected this kind of turnout, but Lisa had warned him. Small towns care about their water, she'd said. When you tell them it's been poisoned for 60 years, they'll listen. Jake stood backstage, heart hammering. Gunnar sat beside him, calm and alert. The dog had that effect. When everything else felt chaotic, Gunnar stayed steady. Lisa appeared beside him. 5 minutes. You ready? No. She smiled. Good. If you weren't nervous, I'd be worried. She glanced at Gunnar. Bring him on stage. People need to see he's part of this. Will they let? This is my town. I'll let whoever I want on that stage. The crowd noise swelled. Jake peered through the curtain. He saw familiar faces from around Silver Point. The woman who ran the gas station. The old man who'd nodded at him from the diner. Families with kids. People who looked healthy and people who looked worn down by illness they couldn't explain. And in the back, arms crossed, expression cold, Marcus Hemisphere and 2 lawyers. Jake's hands started shaking. Gunnar pressed against his leg. Lisa's voice came through the speakers. Thank you all for coming. I know there's been a lot of rumors about what's happening up at the old Morrison property. Tonight, you're going to hear the truth. The crowd quieted. I want to introduce you to Jake Morrison, Conrad Morrison's grandson, and a veteran who's shown more courage in the last week than most of us show in a lifetime. Polite applause. Curious faces. Jake stepped onto the stage, Gunnar walking calmly beside him. The lights were bright. The faces were many. His pulse thundered in his ears. For a second, he was back in Afghanistan. Convoy stopped on a dusty road. Too many eyes watching. Danger everywhere. Then Gunnar nudged his hand. Jake exhaled. He stepped up to the microphone. My name is Jake Morrison, he began. His voice cracked slightly. I didn't know my grandfather. My family never talked about him. But a week ago, I inherited his property and found out why. The crowd leaned forward. In 1965, Conrad Morrison discovered that Hemisphere Mining was dumping toxic waste into the aquifer that supplies Silver Point's drinking water. He tried to expose it. He documented everything. And he was silenced. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Jake continued, hands gripping the podium. I found his bunker. I found his evidence. And I found barrels of industrial waste that have been leaking into your water for 60 years. The murmurs became shouts. Angry voices. Scared voices. Marcus Hemisphere stood. This is speculation. You have no proof. I have EPA test results. Jake cut him off. His voice was stronger now. Federal agents confirmed contamination. Heavy metals. Industrial solvents. The same chemicals Hemisphere used in the 1960s. The room erupted. People shouting at Marcus. Demanding answers. Lisa stepped forward. Everyone, please. Let him finish. Jake's hands were still shaking, but he pushed on. My grandfather spent his life trying to protect this town. He died trying. And I'm here because... He paused, looking at Gunnar. Because I think we owe it to him to finish what he started. The crowd quieted. I don't know most of you, Jake said softly. I've been living in my truck for the last year. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a scientist. I'm just a guy who found some buried truth and decided not to bury it again. He met Marcus's glare across the room. People in this town are sick. Kids have respiratory problems. Cancer rates are through the roof. And it's not random. It's because powerful men chose profit over people. The silence was absolute now. So here's what happens next, Jake said. EPA is testing every well in Silver Point. The truth is coming out. And you, he pointed at Marcus, you can't stop it anymore. Marcus's face flushed red. He turned and walked out, lawyers scrambling after him. The crowd stood. Not all at once, but slowly, one person, then another, until the entire room was on its feet. They weren't just clapping. Some were crying. Some were angry. But all of them were finally, hearing the truth Conrad Morrison had died trying to tell. Jake stepped back from the microphone, legs weak. Lisa squeezed his shoulder. You did good. Jake looked down at Gunnar, who was wagging his tail, calm as ever. We did good, Jake whispered. Over the next 2 weeks, Silver Point transformed. The EPA's full report confirmed widespread contamination. Every well in town tested positive for industrial toxins. The state declared a water emergency. Bottled water was trucked in. A class action lawsuit was filed against Hemisphere Mining. And Jake Morrison, the homeless veteran nobody had noticed a month ago, became the man who saved Silver Point. But Jake didn't feel like a hero. He felt like someone who'd simply done what needed doing. He spent most of his time at the bunker, helping EPA scientists catalog evidence, answering questions, providing his grandfather's documentation. Gunnar was always beside him, steady and calm, the way he'd been since Afghanistan. One afternoon, Lisa drove up with news. Hemisphere Mining just filed for bankruptcy protection, she said, climbing out of her SUV. The lawsuit's going to cost them everything. Jake nodded slowly. Good. There's more. Lisa handed him an envelope. The town council voted. They want to turn Conrad's bunker into a memorial. A place that tells the truth about what happened here. They're asking if you'll oversee it. Jake stared at the envelope. Me? You're a Morrison. It's your family's legacy. Jake opened the envelope. Inside was a contract offering him a salary to manage the memorial site, plus a small house on the property. A home. He looked at Gunnar. What do you think, boy? Gunnar's tail wagged. Lisa smiled. I think that's a yes. 6 months later, the Morrison Environmental Memorial opened to the public. The bunker had been restored, turned into a museum telling the story of corporate corruption, environmental justice, and one man's fight to protect his community. Conrad Morrison's photograph hung on the wall beside Rex, his German shepherd, and next to it, a new photograph. Jake Morrison and Gunnar, standing in front of the bunker that had changed everything. Jake stood at the entrance on opening day, greeting visitors. Families, students, journalists, people who wanted to understand how something like this could happen and how one person could make a difference. Gunnar lay in the shade nearby, content, watching over the place like he'd been born to do it. As the sun set over the Tobacco Root Mountains, Jake sat on the porch of his small house, his home, and watched the sky turn gold. Lisa joined him, 2 mugs of coffee in hand. Hell of a day. Yeah. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. You ever think about what Conrad would say if he saw this? Lisa asked. Jake smiled. I think he'd say it took us long enough. Gunnar trotted over and rested his head on Jake's knee. Jake scratched behind the dog's ears. But I also think he'd be proud. A year after opening the memorial, Jake received another letter. This one from the Department of Veterans Affairs. They'd heard his story and wanted to create a program pairing homeless veterans with rescue dogs, specifically dogs trained for environmental detection work. They wanted Jake to run it. The program would be based at the Morrison Memorial. Veterans would live on-site, work with the dogs, learn new skills, and help with ongoing environmental monitoring throughout Montana. Jake read the letter 3 times. Then he looked at Gunnar, who was now 8 years old, graying around the muzzle, but still strong, still steady. "One more mission, boy." Gunnar's tail thumped. Jake picked up the phone and called Lisa. "I'm going to need help hiring staff. I know a few veterans," Lisa said. "Good people who need a second chance." "Good. Because that's what this place is about." 2 years later, the Morrison program had helped 43 veterans find purpose again. Men and women who'd been lost, broken, homeless, now working alongside dogs, protecting communities, making a difference. Jake stood on the ridge overlooking Silver Point, Gunnar beside him. The dog moved slower now, arthritic hip making walks shorter. But he still came up here every evening, still watched over the valley like it was his sacred duty. "We did it," Jake said softly. "Conrad's legacy is safe. The town is healing. And you." He knelt down, eye level with Gunnar. "You saved me, boy." Every single day. Gunnar licked his hand once, gentle and deliberate. That night, for the first time since Afghanistan, Jake slept without nightmares. He dreamed instead of mountains, of clean water, of a town made whole, and of a German shepherd who'd led him out of darkness into light. On a cold November morning, 5 years after Jake first arrived in Silver Point, Gunnar passed away peacefully in his sleep, lying beside Jake's bed, where he'd always slept. Jake held him and cried like he hadn't cried since the war. The entire town came to the memorial. They buried Gunnar beside Rex, Conrad Morrison's dog, beneath a simple stone that read, "Gunnar, loyal companion, protector, hero." He saw what others missed and never stopped digging for the truth. Jake planted a pine tree over the grave. Every veteran in the program helped. And as the sun set that evening, Jake stood alone at the memorial, looking at the photographs on the wall. Conrad and Rex. Jake and Gunnar. Legacy built on loyalty. "Thank you," Jake whispered. "For everything." The wind through the pines sounded almost like a bark. Jake smiled through his tears and walked back to the house, where 3 new rescue dogs were waiting. The next generation of partners for veterans who needed them. The work continued. The truth stayed alive. And Gunnar's legacy, like Conrad's, would never be buried again.